Welcome, Dr. Sweta. We're so excited to have you here today talking about empowered decision making. Please tell us a little bit about yourself and how you came to this work.
Thank you so much for having me. And I think this is such an important topic that so many people deal with. And so I'm happy to be able to offer something for your listeners. In my former life, I was a clinical pharmacist and a professor for about 10 years. And the first several years, I loved my job. But a few years in, I started to kind of, get a little bit like I needed a change, I needed something different, but I didn't know what. I couldn't identify like what I was looking for, what was really kind of troubling me. And it wasn't until I took a sabbatical where I took time for self-reflection and I was able to then identify like why I was not so happy in my work at that time and what I could do about it to change it. And now I am a leadership coach. So first I redesigned my work and I stayed in that role for probably about a good 5 years. And then I left pharmacy and pursued becoming a writer and a speaker and a coach. And I work with very highly driven professionals who are also at a crossroads. They're either looking for more leadership role, they are looking to find their passion, they're looking to find more balance or authentic expression. And
Mhm.
that could be, changing their jobs or trying to create a side gig or maybe changing their profession. But one of the things that stops most of these clients is that the inability to really be able to make a decision.
Yeah.
It's either not really clearly knowing what they want or they don't know how to go about it. And what in kind of going through all of my clients and seeing starting to notice certain patterns, I realized that there are some common archetypes that would come up. And we mentioned it in the beginning, but it's the perfectionist, the people pleaser, and the overperformer. And so I discovered, the first most kind of crucial thing to do is to be able to identify which archetype is coming up and then having empowering questions to help you to be able to shift that way of thinking that gets in the way of being able to make decisions that would really help you to create work you love.
Right. Wonderful.
Mhm.
And yes, so this ties in very well with my audience, as so many people, I refer to them more as overthinkers, people pleasers, and perfectionists. But I'm sure that everyone is going to be able to have some takeaways from this conversation. And I agree with you in coaching and in my own life as well. Often getting stuck in that decision making mode because either I don't want to be rejected by other people as the people pleaser. I don't want to run the risk of failure in my perfectionism mode, or right that I'm just working in that overperformer. So how how are you able to identify these archetypes? I mean, I mentioned the verbiage that I use a little bit to describe them, but how do you describe, for example, somebody who is a perfectionist in their decision making?
Yeah, and I think the way you describe them is definitely quite classic. And I appreciate that you started with the perfectionist because obviously I have all of these archetypes. And I'm sure a lot of people listening to have them as well. The perfectionist one was harder for me to identify, but it was actually the one that was probably causing the most damage in my life. And, when I think of a perfectionist, and I think things have definitely shifted now with more podcasts and books out there, but we used to think of the perfectionist as something highly revered, right? On job interviews, people would say, I'm a perfectionist. And it meant that we were detail oriented and that we were diligent. But what I learned to realize is that the perfectionist is a way of thinking. And oftentimes that way of thinking is, I need something to be 100% right. It's very black and white thinking, right? It's either good or it's bad. It's either right or it's wrong. And kind of, one classic pop culture example is Madonna or Lady Gaga, depending on your generation. But it's that I come into a room and 99% of people love me and love what I'm doing. But my focus and attention is at 1% that
Mhm.
is not working, that's not right. And, I think we should take pride in wanting to have excellence in what we're doing and what we're putting out in the world. But there's a big difference between excellence and perfectionism. It's again going for that 100% versus there's a quality that meets my standard.
Yes, that quality that meets the standard and the excellence, right? And being able to not just focus on the negative. So people pleasers then, again, something we talk about a lot on this podcast, but how do you see this archetype and the people that can benefit from the people pleasing portion of your decision matrix?
Sure. So, people pleasing, as you identified, is a lot about rejection, et cetera, whereas perfectionism is, and it just kind of want to add one more caveat was that, that it's the fear of failure. And our definition of failure, again, is not being 100%. And we can again have all of these archetypes and they can be commingled as well. So for example, I didn't consider myself a traditional perfectionist. I park crooked, I send out emails with grammatical errors, but my perfectionism I identified showed up in my relationships. So oftentimes the things that would halt me in being able to make decisions, and I wasn't conscious of this, is that I felt like I would be disappointing someone or that I would be hurting someone if I did what I wanted to do. And that was really eye-opening for me. People pleasing is all about, that I'm not going to be loved, I'm not going to be safe, I'm not going to be respected if I'm not meeting someone else's standards. So that's
Right.
kind of the differentiator, right? So perfectionism is like our standard of what's right or wrong, or it could also be other people's, but people pleasing is definitely very other focused and,
Mhm.
how we will be received.
Yes. Yes. Um, the people who not just the rejection, but even just rocking the boat
Oh,
and having
absolutely.
the unwanted types of attention there, right?
Yes.
And so, yes, those 2, and then we have the overperformer as the 3rd, archetype that you focus on. Tell us about overperforming.
Well, overperformer is, I think, very classic, especially in certain groups. Like I'm a woman and I'm an immigrant. And the message that we got growing up was always you got to work hard, you got to work hard, you got to work hard, prove
Mhm.
yourself. And then, you'll be recognized, you'll be safe. And
Mhm.
I just posted an article on LinkedIn this morning, actually, from one of my former clients around how being superwoman is burning women out.
Yeah.
And, when I teach workshops on imposter syndrome, and there are various archetypes of their perfectionism is one of them, but there's other archetypes. But when we put all the archetypes together, it comes out to that super person, right? So that
Mhm.
overperformer, where really it comes down to like feeling like we have to do everything
Yeah.
and doing it all even at the same time. We stretch ourselves beyond what's even physically, mentally, emotionally, you know, just possible, and yet we still feel like we're not doing enough.
Yes. Yes, that not doing enough, and certainly with the people that I coach or who listen to this podcast as well, like you said, we see it in so many roles. It might be your work life or your personal life. It might be carrying the weight of a relationship if you're a parent. Certainly, there's so much going on and doing, and the comparison, all of these that blend together. But yes, that overperforming. So, and I hear that too, especially like you said, the cultural aspect. I know my mom was a first generation American as well, and so not something that I recognized until I was in my adult years, and you started talking with other people, noticing culturally just some of the messaging that comes across. Right, is
Yeah,
the um, different expectations of uh, life and how hard you needed to try, and the not wanting to stick out and being able to fit in. And so, yeah, so
absolutely.
many layers to all of these: your childhood, your culture, your different relationships, and all
Yeah,
of those pieces. So, all right, so we have these 3 archetypes of the perfectionism, people pleasing, and overperforming. And we know that when it comes to making decisions, it can be hard. So you developed this matrix, and what is the benefit for anyone to use this matrix? And then we'll break it down by each person then as well.
absolutely. One of the biggest benefits, and this is why I say, like, I created this model called the well resourced professional, and it has kind of these 3 different pillars. And the one that we're kind of focusing on is empowered expression, right? So, and the first part of that is elevating our own inner voice. But the first pillar in just being a well-resourced professional has so much to do with that self-awareness, and really identifying our own authentic values, our brilliance, what our definition of success is, and then really being able to take leadership to be able to design and create that for ourselves. And so this part that I see is oftentimes the things that stop people the most is where we begin is I'm similar to what I was saying. I'm in this situation where I have these mixed emotions, right? Where there's some benefits, but there's things that are not feeling right and I can't identify what my next step is. And oftentimes people are like looking for an answer, but they haven't actually identified the problem. And so the benefit of kind of going through this process is being able to have, self-awareness and identify what our motivation is for stopping ourselves from having clarity. And I'm just going to say that again because that can sound like, what? What are you talking about? But what is our motivation for stopping our clarity?
Hmm.
Because oftentimes we're not aware of it, but the reason why we don't have clarity, I believe clarity is there. We all have, if we had the support, the tools, we didn't have the conditioning, we would have our inner awareness of what we need to do next. But oftentimes there's kind of I would say a little bit of confusion internally and depending on who's kind of holding the steering wheel, right? So, if it's the perfectionist, it's going to be what's right, like there's a confusion about what's right and what's wrong. If it's the
Hmm.
people pleaser, it's going to be like who is this going to harm or how is this going to cause unwanted attention. And if
Hmm.
it's the overperformer, that steering wheel saying, well, if I do that, I'm not measuring up to, all of these things.
Hmm.
And so the benefit of doing this is that you can identify who's holding the steering wheel. And I think that creates a little bit of distance because when you're able to see it as this is a thing I'm doing as opposed to who I am,
Hmm.
right? Because the perfectionist would say, you're not doing the right thing. The people pleaser is saying is that you're not, being a team player or what, you're not measuring up to other people's expectations. And the overperformer would say you're not doing enough. And
Hmm.
that goes from being an identity to oh, this is a part of me that is just trying to protect me.
Hmm.
We are just our nervous systems and our brain are designed to keep us familiar.
Right.
And familiar doesn't always serve us. If you're looking to grow, if you're looking to, if you're looking for fulfillment, you're looking to make more of an impact, then your, nervous system is going to get charged up and it's going to say not safe, not safe. And so it pulls on these parts of yourself, the perfectionist, the people pleaser, and the overperformer to keep you small, to keep you same.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
so again, the benefit of it is like if you can see that and you could say, "Oh, okay, this part of me is kind of taking charge here. Let me come back into my leadership role."
Hmm.
Right? And say, "Okay, we see you. We know that this is what you're trying to do. And here, look, here's the vision of who we're becoming." And you can even give these archetypes new roles.
Hmm. Yes. And I love that. And I talk about that as well as just, it's not about who you are, but really having some separation and that this is a part of me. Of course, I'm freaking out right now because this is what I do in this mode, but it doesn't mean that it always has to be that way or that I can't proceed differently, that I'm learning some new skills and learning how to do things differently. Yeah. So when people can recognize and say, hey, this is the people pleaser part of me because I'm really afraid of like rocking the boat in this situation, what comes next?
So, when you're trying to identify which archetype is kind of
Hmm.
taking the steering wheel, right? So for the people pleaser, it would definitely be identifying like who am I afraid of hurting? Whose permission am I seeking?
Hmm.
Right? And it's again, and you're a full adult and you might be thinking, "Oh, well, no, like I don't need anybody else's permission." And yes, that's like the present person that you are. But again, as we were saying, when your nervous system is hijacked, you're not operating from who you are right now. You're oftentimes operating from a younger part of self, which didn't have the autonomy and the agency and the safety to be able to feel like they could do what they want, or that they could honor their value over someone else's.
Mhm.
And so, and as a coach, and I'm sure you know you've done a podcast interview this on this already, but a classic coach kind of exercise is really identifying your values.
Mhm.
And one thing that I often see, and I just want to name this because I think it's really important, is that when we do these, if you've done a values exercise, or if you're somebody that's looking to do your values, really being able to discern aspirational values versus your genuine values. And that's
Yes.
something that I do a lot with my clients, is helping them kind of pick apart who they think they should be versus who they really are and what they value. But when you really know your values, then that's something that you can come back to if you're having kind of these, what I say, mixed emotions, right?
Mhm.
Where it's like, and you could be in a place where maybe you have values that are conflicting with one another in a certain situation. But
Mhm.
again, coming back to that kind of pause, and the question, the empowering question in this situation is, what is of the highest? Right? What is of the highest for this situation? What is the value that is most important in this situation?
Mhm.
And when you're able to identify that, again, it helps you to move forward. And I can give you an example from a client. So,
Yes,
and
please.
this might seem like a simple example, but identifying it in simple situations versus high stake situations is actually a way you can build your muscle. And
Mhm.
I had a client, and one of the ways this people pleaser was showing up was that he was planning a trip for his family, and there was like a big trip and a lot of people were coming, and someone said to him, why don't you just hire a travel agent to do it? Like, why are you going through all this whole process? And excuse me, one of the other things that I do with my clients is I help them identify their brilliance, like what they love to do and what they're really good at. And one of the things that we identified is that he loves to like throw dinner parties and have people with different food restrictions or preferences, and creating a menu that meets everybody's needs. He, you know, he's a designer. He's a researcher and a designer. In his job, he was actually, you know, somebody who does publications and creates studies. And so we saw that through line of like, planning this trip actually was joyful for him, because it was like everybody has different preferences and he was getting to be in his brilliance. But the
Mhm.
voice in his mind was, I'm cheap if I don't outsource this. And so being able to recognize, actually, no, this is my value of being able to design, helped him to be able to move forward with this. Otherwise, that kind of other people's, you know, preferences,
Mhm.
expectations, et cetera, what was feeding into that.
Thank you for that example. Yes, and I think that's so important, right? Of course, we talk about values and all that, but I really like your distinction then as well with aspirational values, because that, especially for people pleasers, because
Mhm.
it's like, what should I want to do? And thinking this is really important, even if that's not authentically you, but how you label that too, finding that person's line of brilliance there for them to be able to have that clarity is really helpful. And do you have an example then, say, for somebody who is more of a perfectionist? What would it look like to work through with an example on something like that?
Yeah. So, you know, perfectionism, as we mentioned, is kind of that all or nothing way of thinking, right? It's 100% right, it's 100% perfect. And so you can imagine if you're trying to put yourself out there, that fear of failing, right? Because your measure of failure is 100%. I got to get it right. I got to get it right on the first try. And, you know, on the top of this matrix, which folks can download on my website, and I'm sure you'll put the link in the note, but it's just my website, /matrix, is, you know, that really being able to look at your situation and see, okay, what's motivating my thinking here? And so that's kind of the first thing, you know, regardless of what the archetypes are. And this one, I perfectionist, I have to say, is probably my most detrimental one. And it's really a matter of pausing and identifying what are you measuring as success, right? What am I expecting this situation to be like, to look like, so that it measures up? And then just kind of creating some distance from that.
Mhm.
right? And saying like, okay, is this really feasible? Like if this was somebody else who had this expectation, would this feel feasible around
Mhm.
what success would be, right? And then shifting focus, and this one is the most empowering. I practice this over and over and over again. I mean, I did it this weekend, with my family. I was with my family, and I'm feeling so happy with my relationships in my family right now, and I put a lot of intention in creating that. And we had a little spur moment of a kind of like old dynamics, and I saw myself getting really scared and kind of going into that spiral, that overthinking, right? Oh my god, are we going to go back into this? And I paused and I was like, oh my god, let me focus my energy on the Saturday where my husband and son like made lunch and dinner together for me, and all the positive parts of it. So the real empowering question with perfectionism is, what is working and how can I amplify that, as opposed to trying to, meet the needs of, and this comes again, I'm kind of bringing people pleaser in here because that's how much my perfectionism shows up. But if it's putting out an email, for example, I know some of my clients, they said they spend 2 hours on email because they're so concerned about, coming the perception of how they come off.
Mhm.
And so it comes back to same thing with values in the way, but it's coming back to the core of like, what is my purpose for doing this, and really identifying it. Am I doing my best?
Right.
Have I done my best? I mean, that's such an empowering question as well.
Mhm. And I think you alluded to previously kind of that black and white thinking that we
Yes.
get into with perfectionism. And I know on your matrix, you have line that says, "Is there a possibility for both and I
Yes.
really appreciate that. That's where I'm able to pause and I ask myself that in different ways, like what else is true? That this email is not perfect. I can identify it's not perfect, and I've spent a lot of time on it, and it still has value, and people maybe will still appreciate it, for example, for something like that. Or but trying to get out of that black and white mindset because, right,
Yes.
it's that right or wrong mentality, and when you can just open it up just a little bit to be able to say, what's already working
Yes.
and what else is true, to get off of that spiral for sure.
Yeah. Thanks for bringing up that both and, because that is something that I find is new for a lot of my clients, to think in terms of both and, of like you're doing a new skill, you're trying a new skill, right? And it's like, okay, yeah, there's probably room to improve, right? And I did it. Right? Like I tried something new, which could be really hard, especially at a certain age. And so like that both and is it creates so much opportunity for more possibilities.
Mhm. Yes, and I see that, like you said, learning skills, for me, it's technology kinds of things that I just want to be like, "Ah, this is too hard." And even with this podcast today, we
Yeah.
started over at one point in time because the tech wasn't quite there. And it's like, all right, so now here we go. We have this. It's still going to be quality that we can put out there. And are there likely settings in this new app that I'm using that I need to still work on and develop? Yes. But I would also, former me would probably not have recorded the podcast because I would have sat and tried to figure it all out ahead of time and maybe gone weeks without any sort of recording because I was just so set on having to do it all right. And now it's like, okay, it's good enough that I can
That's a
put it out there.
wonderful example.
Mhm.
Thanks for sharing.
Yes. So you've mentioned a couple times, like with when we get into decision making mode, and we get stuck, or maybe you're spiraling and ruminating. How do you help your clients learn to implement some of these tools? Like where do they start? Because this is all brand new, and they might be able to recognize, oh, that's people pleasing or that's perfectionism, but then what? How do they start working this into their daily lives, and what does that look like?
That's such a good question because these are tendencies that have kind of been grooved into our brain over repetition, right? It's like how many times do we, have we said, had mindsets that have basically internalized these archetypes to making us believe that that's the way that we are. So at first, I just want to I love this question. And some of the things that I have my clients do, and it can sound so simple, but I gotta tell you, it's not always so easy. I start off every single client session with glimmers and celebrations. And what are some moments that we've had since our last call that have been real genuine celebrations for you? Okay. Because there's a typical like, oh, I got, we think these big things, right? Like I got a good, feedback survey or something like that from work or et cetera. But it could be these kind of quote unquote small moments. It might seem small, but that really made a big impact for you. And
Mhm.
it could be something like, it took me 30 minutes to write that email instead of 2 hours, right? And taking time to identify and celebrate those things, it does many things. One is that there's literally a part of the brain called the hippocampus, which has, the job of what's not enough and, satiation, like what fills me up. And most of us that overthink, our muscle for the hippocampus is so geared towards not enoughness. And so we're always looking for how we don't measure up. And that's what we focus on. And that's what we set our goals on. That's what our internal talk is all about. Right. So when you create a practice, we have to practice because this is literally a muscle of recognizing for yourself where you are measuring up, what is making a difference, what you value by identifying genuine wins.
Mhm.
You start to then shift this your state to one of the most empowered things is recognizing yourself. And I
Mhm.
think that that's really, really important because oftentimes these archetypes are often created based on external perceptions, how we think people are perceiving us.
Mhm.
And so when you're creating a practice that shifts your state to an internal focus, internal recognition, it's very empowering. And you're also building up that muscle, the hippocampus, that part of the brain, so that when you are going out throughout your day, you start your vision is towards what is working. Your vision is towards your values. Your vision is towards what is enough and where do I need more
Mhm.
support? Like you're able to suddenly identify that's your internal speak, right? Where do I need my support?
Mhm.
What are my needs here as opposed
Yeah,
to
I really like that, and I know for myself and so many of my clients as well, when you get into that high achieving mode, it's always the goalpost is always moving. As soon as you accomplish something, it can be better, it maybe should be better is the internal line in your thought, and you're just on to the next thing, and there really is no, internal notice even, let alone validation of I achieved this thing that was a goal. And so I like that, and that you start off with those little wins and pieces. I may even borrow that from you with some of my future sessions. I really like that.
yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And one of the things that I realized is really very important is is that to me that what are your celebrations is a check-in system, right? And so that to me is something that we could do on a daily basis. You could do that on a weekly basis. But I also, have quarterly seasonal planning that I offer. I have these different workbooks on my websites. I do them with my clients, but what I call a checks and balances system that if you when you set an intention, so that's another very important thing is recognizing that these archetypes are getting in the way of your happiness and your fulfillment and your success, right? And then making a conscious intention to say I want to shift this, right? And an intention, what I love about an intention is it's different than a goal. A goal is like these very specific things that I'm trying to do, but an intention is like I'm trying to change, I'm trying to transform. And it's becoming this version of you or amplifying this part of you or having this experience that that feels far, it almost feels like a little far away because we're so just, you know, just used to being this way, thinking this way.
Mhm.
But when you set that intention and then you put practices on that help you to be able to amplify them. And so this checks and balance system, so starting with the celebration part of it, it just start to give you data
Mhm.
because it's going to be a little bit different for everyone. Like we could definitely suggest practices or whatnot, but my other, I have this other framework called my natural framework, and the you are in natural is your design, and you want to design your life based on your data, right? And so what really works for you? And so you want to start to just, okay, when was the last time I got out of people pleasing? What did I do? The last time I kind of hit a wall with perfectionism, what got me out of it? So as you start to kind of collect more of your own data through kind of doing these
Mhm.
celebrations, and also just
Yes.
even noticing, like pausing and identifying, like, oh, that's my people pleaser. And what are the environments and situations that bring it out? Right.
Mhm.
So like I know that my people pleasing shows up a lot professionally. And I know that my perfectionism shows up a lot professionally, and my people pleasing shows up a lot personally.
Mhm.
I'm starting to get data about myself, and that's what I really, would love for your listeners to start doing. Is just the main thing you can do is start putting attention on yourself,
Yeah.
and to start just noticing as data. So the difference between noticing it as data versus judging yourself or criticizing yourself, and just because if
Mhm.
we're overthinking, it's easy to be like, "Oh, I'm being a people pleaser. Oh, I'm being like I'm doing it again." And just kind of like, "No, okay. Oh, I notice I'm being motivated by people pleasing. I'm being motivated by perfectionism." Just get curious. What what's my environment? Who was I talking to? What was I doing that
Mhm.
got me into that state? So then you start to kind of create your own data, and then you can start to build structures to know that this is when my tendency shows up. And so then
Yep.
you start to have a plan, and that's what I do
Mhm.
in my kind of clarity planning sessions, is that we create structures for the barriers that are going to come up instead of
Right.
just worrying about them. And so when I go into people pleasing, okay, I know that this is how I start to act,
Mhm.
right? And I can pull up this if you don't have that data and you're like, I'm just starting, you pull up this matrix and you start with asking yourself an empowering question,
Mhm.
right? And that empowering question, based depending on the archetype, can be really helpful to just, you know, what I love to say is that if we have a brain that is just so good at thinking, the last thing we want to do is make it wrong. What I would say is just give it another job.
Yeah.
And your brain is always trying to answer questions, and whether we're conscious of it or not, the questions typically are, I'm not doing enough. What am I not doing enough of? Who am I not pleasing? What am I
Mhm.
not getting right? But if we shift it to those empowering questions that I have in the matrix, then your brain will start to answer those. What is good enough? Right? What is working here? What is it that I really
Mhm.
value?
Right. Yeah. And I just wanted to draw attention. We talked a lot about the perfection and the people pleasing and that overperforming one, right? Because they all really blend
Yeah.
together. But some of
Totally.
the question that are associated with overperforming that I like too is, will this lead to long term satisfaction, or is it just like a to do check off? And that's it. Like I said, I think that can filter in as well, like that long-term satisfaction, because if you're even in a people-pleasing kind of mode, right, it's not about your long-term satisfaction. It's something else. And so overworking and just more doing, also taking a look, is this, being pushed by fear of missing out, the FOMO, or is it the need to control something? So again, really looking at your motivation with that. And so many of these blend together. It might be all or one, or certain aspects of your life that you see. Like you said, individually, that you notice the perfectionism at work, but the people pleasing more in your personal relationships and things like that. So I hope that people can take a look at this matrix, and it's not something that you have to memorize. Again, it's just it's starting to notice these things about yourself. And again, you can get this decision makers. I have it linked in the show notes. So hopefully you can take a look at that. And the more you know about yourself, that awareness that you have about yourself, that's how you can make a change, right? Because you can't make changes if you don't know that it's
Yeah.
there.
And you could print this out and put it where you can see it. Cause I think that's when you ask, like, what could you do to implement it? There's one thing to be able to like have a tool, but then there's another to use it. And it's not always easy, right? It's just familiar is just so much easier. Changing our mindset and how we operate. I just want to, anybody who's even thinking of willing to do that, I just want to say, like, kudos to you. It takes a tremendous amount of courage to change.
Yes.
And so I often will have my client, anything that we do, whether it's this matrix or even their own intentions, I have them printed out, put it on your laptop, put it on your phone. So it's a reminder and it's something that you're often seeing until you've built, again, like I was saying, that hippocampus or the parts of your brain that it becomes engrooved in your, in your nervous system, so that that's the way you operate. It takes time to change. It takes practice to change. So having kind of these reminders, so print it out, put it out there. I love that you identified that. Like, does this matter? Because I mean, I created this and I just recently had a big shift for myself where I was like, I'm leading a group and if for an organization, and there's one person that wasn't happy. They didn't look happy. And my people pleaser was like, oh, and
Hmm.
that question of, is this going to matter in 6 months? And it's like, no, like I have a couple of like weeks with these people. And of course, I want to be excellent and do my best. Am I putting my best out there? Absolutely. Can I control how people receive it? No.
Hmm.
And so that question really helped me to get out of my overthinking. And so, like you were saying, that FOMO, a lot of people, a lot of clients definitely just they're curious, they want to do a lot of different things. They want to keep their relationships, they want to do their best work. It's totally I was gonna say normal, but I don't know that it's normal. I think it's also like society. We talked about conditioning, that whole like you're gonna miss out. I remember one of the questions that came up for me when I did this work was that, like, my relationships can handle space. That was kind of what came up as one of my answers to a question around like feeling like I had too many things to do and too many people to respond to. And that came from, and this is what will start happening, is that when you start to pause and ask these questions, your kind of your authentic leader starts to pop up and it starts to give you that wisdom. And when I heard that for myself, I was like, wow, that was so empowering. And it made me feel like I don't have to try to have all my hands on everything, because
Hmm.
people know I care about them. People know that I'm doing my best. And that just gave me a lot more spaciousness, which was
Yeah.
really helpful for being more resourced.
Hmm. And as you're working with clients and they're starting to utilize this resource or the framework, so we've talked about having that awareness, doing that. What does that look like in real time? Are you encouraging people to pause? Is this more of a reflection after the fact, either in their head or journaling, or how, how is it actually implemented at the beginning?
Both and.
Both and I love it.
So, what I like to do is to help people to have some intentional time for reflection, because it's so easy to put attention on ourselves aside. But if we make it kind of just easy, in like an easy kind of ritual. So, like, I have some clients where it's like Sunday night. Okay. Let's, I want you to look at your week, right? Look at your schedule for your week. And this is like a general practice for anything that's being implemented. So it's not always necessarily this matrix, but anything, right? And look at your appointments, look at the things that you're going to be doing. And I want you to think about what are some of the kind of um, undesirable experiences that you could see popping up, right? So it could be like, oh, I have a performance review with my boss. Okay, I there's definitely an opportunity for my perfectionist to come up, right? Or my overperformer. And then kind of creating a plan in advance for that. And so it could be like, I'm gonna, and these could be very tactical. Like, so for the people pleaser, if your tendency is to, I'm not making that person happy, right? And you have your performance review, you would make a list of all the things, and let's say the perfectionist is coming in as well, right? All the things that you have done and how they are valuable to you, and how they're maybe, and I always like to say, people say don't care what other people think. I mean, if you're a people pleaser, I think the flip of that is you're a people person. And that's a
Mhm.
beautiful thing that we shouldn't take away. You care about what other people think, and I don't want to take that away from you. It's just a matter of where you're putting the emphasis on, right? Are you, putting yourself down to kind of meet other people's expectations? And so, but in that situation, you could make a list of the ways that you are meeting expectations for yourself and what you value, so that you're going in with kind of the focus on uplifting yourself, so that, because you're
Mhm.
vulnerable to the people pleaser coming in, or one of the archetypes coming in. So so short of this is making a plan, really making an intentional plan. And it doesn't have to be elaborate. It doesn't have to be, but just, okay, what do I have going on today? How do I want to feel today? What
Mhm.
are the potential archetypes that could come up, and what can I implement? And not, again, like, pausing and taking a breath. Like, that doesn't always work when you're really triggered, right?
Right.
So, how can I, on my drive to work, I'm going to listen to something that's going to be uplifting for me. I'm going to talk to a friend, and I'm going to ask them to, let's talk about all the things that are working, so that these are kind of tactical ways that you can kind of shift your mindset beforehand, so that it can, respond to this archetype coming and not having them overtake. I don't know if that kind of offers something, but and then there is the day, like, have had clients that suddenly this becomes a practice. They're going through anxiety throughout the day, and then they just pause. And one thing that I love, and it's taking your hand and putting it on your heart, and just asking yourself, what is this really about? What do I need? What do I need? And you might not get an answer right away, but you're shifting the focus of where your brain goes from automatic
Mhm.
external approval or internal criticism to an empowering question. So put your brilliant mind that loves to overthink to work, answering
Yes.
questions that will serve you.
Thank you so much for sharing this resource and empowering decision making model with us. Can you tell us where people can find more about you and the other resources and coaching that you offer?
Sure. So my website is www.drswetachawla.com, and I'm sure you'll put a link in the notes.
Yes.
They can download this matrix, just backslash matrix, and you'll download this matrix, and then you'll find, all my other resources on my website as well. So I have a book, and I also have some workbooks in my store, some DIY workbooks. But I do offer coaching. So I offer one-on-one coaching. You'll see my coaching packages on there as well. Other podcast interviews and resources, so you can get to know me a little bit better, because I know that, coaching is a big commitment, and it takes a
Mhm.
lot of trust. And then in LinkedIn and Instagram, I'm at Dr. Sweta Chawla as well. So any other events or offers that I put out, you'll see in there. And you can sign up for my newsletter too, where you get all that information.
All right. Well, thank you all so much for listening. Thank you, Dr. Sweta, for being here today. And I hope you have a great week and are able to make some more empowered decisions.
Thank you so much for having me.